It's gotten to the point where we could now confidently name certain parts of Dead Rising's history and even distinguish which year a build is from. This is possible because of how radically different each era of Dead Rising looks from one another, and era being a milestone such as Xbox Summit, TGS, Las Vegas, and E3, all of which are builds that, when compared to each other, have various differences that can allow us to say these are different eras or generations of how Dead Rising once looked, played, and feeled. And one thing I have consistently said in many of my videos is how Dead Rising's beta used to be dark and spooky, and eventually the final version became much more comedy-centered, and with the dark aesthetic being much less noticeable. But I realized that I never really explained how exactly that tone change came to be, or why it even happened in the first place. So for this video, I'm going to try to explain the major differences that Dead Rising went through that would eventually bring us the atmosphere we know today. First of all, I need to explain generations a bit more carefully. You see, the thing is, Dead Rising has way more builds than we give it credit for. The reason is when a game is in development, thousands of builds are compiled for playtesters to try out, each build having so little of a change as a single new model. But something like that is needed to test, because adding a new weapon could fuck up everything else. So behind the curtains, Dead Rising has hundreds of thousands of builds that we will never get to see. The reason for that is these builds never actually got printed to a disc, because work in progress or internal testing builds are just played right off the hard drive. It would be a waste of money to print every single build ever compiled onto a disc. Game development just doesn't work that way. However, milestones were printed to discs. Milestone builds are when the developers have something big to show off, such as a completely playable level, or a major plot point in the story is completed. The build may still be extremely early outside of what this demo wants you to see, but it still has the capability to show off what the game will look like once it has a few more months of polishing. The builds that I frequently talk about on this channel are those milestone builds. The majority of these builds were taken to gaming conventions such as E3 and Tokyo Game Show to present to the public how Dead Rising is currently looking, and they continue to show off milestones again and again until the final game is printed. Every single one of the Dead Rising beta discs that I own are builds that were shown at gaming conventions and are the definition of a milestone. So let's get back to generations then. A generation in this case is when over the course of a few years the game can have many different artistic or technical changes to the way the game is played or presented. The reason generations even happen is usually when ideas the creator of the game once had start to become harder and harder to visualize, or the idea just plainly doesn't work. So changes to the story, gameplay, design, and the feeling of the game are then made. This is the reason why some games look very different from their early presentations to what actually releases in stores. Take Resident Evil 4 as an example. Originally the game's tone and the way it played was very different in concept to what was shown in the final version, likely because what was originally shown just didn't work, or they had technical difficulties getting it to work, so it was just changed. I personally feel that Dead Rising has 3 generations in the course of its development, which span from 2005 to 2006. So for this video, let's check out those 3 major changes between the years and see if Dead Rising's tone has changed at all, like I've been saying it has. So first up, for Generation 1 in mid-2005, we have the Tokyo Game Show build. Now, this time frame was way back when Dead Rising was still unsure how it wanted to look. Keiji knew that he wanted the protagonist to be an average Joe, and he didn't want Frank to be some superhero with special powers. So he wanted the polar opposite of Leon S. Kennedy. The design of the game at this point went with a warm look, in a sense where the mall seemed very inviting with bright colors and plenty of sunlight. However, the design was cleverly punctuated by horror, because the zombies were dark, freaky looking ghouls, able to easily blend in with the map's shadows, making the player feel uneasy. Because while the world was warm and nice, the enemies made you feel like this mall was just a facade, and it was actually just, well, hell. Or at least, hell in the most relaxing, unexpected place. Also, the story would likely consist of the same path that the final game goes through, but judging how character development seemed to be very different, the plot would have likely been different as well, which would suggest the story might have fit in with the feeling of the game. There likely would have been more emphasis on death and feeling trapped, rather than feeling like a hero and uncovering mysteries. Now, fast forward a few months to the end of 2005 and the very beginning of 2006, and we have Generation 2, which would be the Las Vegas pre-E3 era. Now, Las Vegas pre-E3, or more commonly known as pre-E3, is a build which decided to change things up a bit after we last saw Generation 1. Pre-E3 kept the dark, eerie zombie aesthetic, however it also incorporated that design into the world as well. The result was everything being dark, almost sickly looking. There isn't much sunlight, and even where there is, it has dark, harsh shadows which further add to the look of everything. The mall looks cold and empty. Even the security room, while I'll admit very early in development, was still, like the rest of the mall, going to feel dead and kinda, It makes you feel like you have a cold or something. I think the best way to describe pre-E3 is saying it looks grim, where instead of a happy mall with dead corpses, we have a sad, eerie mall with dead corpses. This is one of the more interesting generations of Dead Rising's development because this is so far from what we got in the final game. Now, the game's story, admittedly, was very similar to how the final game works, if not completely identical. So we can't really say that the story of Pre-E3 was going to be dark, but the overall atmosphere was going to be eerie and creepy. A lot of people have said that Pre-E3 is probably this dark only because it's a beta, and while that's a good assumption, Pre-E3 is actually very far along in development, and the builds before it show the lighting being bright and completed. Whereas for this build, or this generation to be more specific, they decided to darken everything up, remove the happy vibe that the game displayed, and leave you with this dark shell. I think it makes sense why this design never really made it, because the whole appeal of Dead Rising was its comedy layered on top of a serious story, and I don't think this would have sold nearly as well, even if personally I think it looks amazing. So, moving on, what do we have left? Well, Generation 3 brings us the final game. Not much needs to be said on this era of Dead Rising because, well, we all played it. It's nothing new to learn about, but it shows a definite difference from the previous two we mentioned, because now, the lighting and feeling of the game has reverted back to happy and warm, much like TGS, but the zombies also got a complete redesign, making them look much less like scary ghouls and now just kinda dead, like normal people who were bitten. That's about it. They don't look like gory monsters anymore like they used to. I should definitely mention that this generation of Dead Rising actually came into fruition pretty early in 2006. In fact, the 0.70 build of Dead Rising that I have has this finalized atmosphere and aesthetic, yet that build is from April of 2006, way before the game was finished. So clearly, in the last few months of development, Kiji and his team decided enough with the old look, enough with the scary look, let's try to make this appeal to as many people as possible, and I think they did. The version of Dead Rising we all fell in love with as kids was the final version, so I think that says a lot. Was it a mistake changing the appearance of the game instead of leaving it looking like TGS or Pre-E3? Well, I think that's up to you and your personal taste to decide. I love the scary ghoul concept of the beta zombies, but I much prefer having the finalized happy feeling mall because that almost adds to the creepiness itself in a way. But there's still room there to have fun and laugh about things in the game and just enjoy it for what it is. You don't have to take Dead Rising so seriously. But anyhow, thanks for watching, and as always, subscribe for more.